Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on writing the belonging essay. Now this video is aimed at Year 12 ESL students and is going to be examining how to write an essay in your area of study of belonging. So when we're looking at essays for your area of study, we're going to be looking at these areas. Firstly, the structure for the perfect thematic essay. So how you can structure that and how you can use structure to get results. Secondly, we're going to be examining some sample extracts from essays to really view the standard which are expected. We're also going to be looking at how to use language and style in essays as a way of furthering your essay goals and really creating sophisticated essays which the mark is going to enjoy reading. So let's look at what the thematic essay is. Now, thematic essays are essays which argue a theme. That's obviously stated in the title of thematic essay. So the focus of your entire essay is going to be belonging, and everything will always be coming back to what belonging is, your thesis statement, and the belonging question which you're being specifically asked. So if we examine topic sentences, they're therefore going to be different aspects of the theme in the text. So each new paragraph is going to give a different insight into how belonging is expressed in the text and the related texts, which you're going to be examining. So the aspect of the theme is analysed in depth in the paragraph that follows. So you really then get a solid analysis using techniques and quotes of that theme. So let's have a look at how to prepare for that core essay. So ideally, you are going to be writing a new essay every time you get a new question. However, that's not always realistic for an HSE student. You'll have a lot of time pressure, and also there are going to be some things in the text which you're always going to want to be including. So it's more realistic to write one sort of very general essay which addresses a couple of themes which you can really mould to properly answer any question which you're given. So it becomes a really useful resource for you. However, most students only write this one essay and adapt this to the question. So you'll definitely be in the majority if you go with this technique over having to write an essay, a new one, every single time you get a new question, which is going to be every time that you practice an exam or get a practice essay in class. So anytime, instead of just writing a new essay, you'll be adapting your ideas, your quotes, and your techniques from that old one. So today we're going to be focusing on how to write that perfect essay, which is going to be easy for you to adapt to everything else. So you're going to become more confident and skilled over time. Obviously, the more you practice, the more you're going to have an understanding of this area of study, and the more you're going to be able to express that through texts. So research is also extremely important when approaching the area of study. However, a difficult aspect to analyse is where to use this research. So you need to research on the context and background of your text. If you've looked at our specific videos on ESL text, you'll see that we examine historical and cultural background as a really important introductory element to looking at the texts. So if you don't have one of these texts, which we've analysed on our videos, you can do this yourself through internet research. Once you select this material, you should obviously read it and analyse it. So you don't just get what it seems to say on the surface, but really what it's saying in depth to you as the reader. It's really important that you don't use all of it in your essay because the texts are your focus. The history isn't your focus, the texts are. So therefore it's really important that you use about no more than 3 quotes from outside your text. So yes, you can be quoting people like critics and reviewers, but they're not the focus. Your own view on the text becomes the focus. So in your introduction, you're going to be using quotes from famous philosophers, writers, and academics. You can also make this a short quote, which is highly relevant. It's really important that this quote is not too long because this just seems parrot-like and unoriginal. It's really boring if the marker's just reading a quote that you didn't even write. It's more important that you get your own view across and just use a couple of words as quotes to back up that idea, while still showing that you've really done that research. You can use this to support your argument, not be your argument. So that really very solid line of distinction is very important to obey. You don't want the quotes and the critics to determine what you say, but instead just to back up what you've already said. Once you get to your body, that's where you're starting to include a quote maybe about historical context or the setting of your text. So this is obviously also stemming from that research. This can be by a historian, or it could also be by a critic, or perhaps even the composer of the text. Anyone who has something worthwhile to say about what the text is really about. It can also be in a body paragraph focusing on setting and scene. So this is where you'd probably put that in, as those sort of things are most relevant to quotes which you might be stating about things like context from historians, for example. Quotes from the author or composer about the meaning or interpretation of their text are also quite useful to have as sources in your work, but again, you don't want to be focusing on what the author says in retrospect about the work, but instead quotes specifically taken from that work. That literary focus is what you always want to be coming back to, because obviously this is an English exam and they're looking for your knowledge of the text. You're also going to be supporting your belonging ideas or analysis within a body paragraph using these. So again, the keyword is support, not becoming the analysis, but just supporting that analysis. So let's look at the guide to writing a thematic essay. So there are a number of steps which you need to do in order, and you really need to sort of memorize this as if it was a formula to make sure that you produce an essay which is structured and well written. So firstly, you need to be using an introduction. Now in that introduction, you want to be firstly using question keywords. So drawing out specific things from the question and quoting these. Using your thesis idea. So that idea which you've developed from your understanding of what the whole module means, and using that in your introduction to express your ideas. Using the syllabus rubric, which we've been over in earlier videos. You also need to name all of the texts which are going to be discussed. Really just to orient the marker to the author, to the text, to the medium of your text, things like that. Just to introduce them to what you're going to be writing about. You're going to also be stating your argument, so specifically outlining what your argument is going to be, and then finishing through signposting your 3 to 4 main points in order. So these are all of the elements in the introduction, which the marker is really expecting to see. So writing a few practice introductions just to get that final introduction right, which you will be using, is definitely a good idea. So if we take a look at this sample introduction, you'll see the way in which all these different elements which I've discussed have literally been utilised into an introduction. So, the search for belonging necessitates choice, as an individual seeks out belonging experiences where they can receive emotional nourishment from other individuals, relationships, or communities. However, the powerful need for emotional nourishment may drive an individual to choose to change their identity in ways which are painful or damaging. So in this extract, let's take a look at what we can see. Firstly, in blue highlighted here, you'll see that there are some question keywords. So these are the sort of things which the question is going to specifically be asking you. The search for belonging, choices, seeking out, and choosing to change their identity. You're then getting your thesis statement. So belonging experiences, receiving emotional nourishment, powerful need for emotional nourishment. These are the sort of things which you would have personally developed and that you're going to be including in your opening sentences. You then are including words from that belonging rubric. So words such as individuals, relationships, or communities are really important to make sure the marker knows that you understand the rubric which is introduced in your texts. If we continue reading, the possible consequences of such choices are considered in Peter Strzelecki's anthology, Migrant Poetry, Immigrant Chronicle, 1975. The free-verse poem Felix Strzelecki considers his change in cultural identity, while Postcard explores one's search for belonging when caught between two cultures. Choosing to change one's cultural identity is explored in Alan Bailey's The China Coin, 1992, where emotional nourishment allows Leah to acknowledge her Chinese identity. So again, here we're getting more points from that introduction outline. We're seeing that you're introducing the text, so literally stating what they are and the year which they were composed. You're also stating the author, so who specifically composed these. The genre, so free verse poem. Theme, so issues such as cultural identity and belonging. Additionally, context, so the sort of things which are outlining this work, the main issues of this work. So really just orienting the marker to all of these different factors. If we continue to the last part of the introduction, this is contrasted with the additional material, Isabel Carmody's fantasy prose fiction Phoenix, 1996, from the short story suite Green Monkey Dreams, where Princess Rangar's search for belonging and emotional nourishment drives her to acts of personal destruction. Through these texts, change of identity through choice, the search for belonging and emotional nourishment, and the past as a barrier to belonging are considered. So again, we get the different elements here being introduced. We see that the additional text is being named and briefly explained. And also that in that final sentence, we're seeing that list of the 3 to 4 main arguments. So this is where the marker is really going to understand what direction which you're going to be taking your whole essay in and what they can expect to be reading as you continue on. So now let's look at paragraph structure. So firstly, you want to be including a topic sentence. Obviously, this is going to be introducing the main point and linking that back to the question, just as you would in any other topic sentence. Secondly, you'll be stating the language technique and then supporting this with a quote. So using basic paragraph structure and really applying that to your belonging studies. You then want to explain how this affects the theme. So not only saying what the quote and technique is, but how that specifically relates to belonging as a concept. You also then want to be including a concluding sentence, and this not only sums up your ideas, but links your answer back to the question. So you're always making sure that the marker knows that you're answering the question, not just answering with that generic essay that you've written. So let's just look at some tips for writing body paragraphs. If you imagine that these paragraphs are vertebrae, so the little bones which are building up the backbone, you'll see that they're uniform units creating a pathway of proof. So basically your main idea is that each of these little paragraphs are really going to be adding up to slowly proving that belonging thesis and answering the question. Each paragraph must address a new theme, which is going to prove something to the marker. Body paragraphs are obviously going to be very strict and formulaic and also repetitive, but this is also going to be leading to the clearest argument. So while it may seem a bit boring to write, it's very structurally sound, it's very logical, and it's so really what you want to be going for. You want to be including about 1 to 4 quotes per paragraph, so however many you feel comfortable memorizing and how quickly you can write are going to be determining this. And then you want to be showing off by including different techniques. So if you've got 3 quotes in a paragraph, you wouldn't make them all metaphors. You'd perhaps make 1 a metaphor, 1 personification, and 1 a simile. So you really get that range of language techniques there. You're also getting linking paragraphs, which are drawing together your ideas throughout the paragraphs and ensuring that they're not just separate ideas, but they are all linked in your pathway of proof. If we take a look at the conclusion, obviously that includes a tone of finality, using words such as ultimately and finally. Don't start with in conclusion and then go on. This is just a little bit pedestrian and a little bit too much of a cliche. So instead express this same idea with words such as ultimately and finally. Secondly, you'll provide links to the rubric and the question. You'll also be explaining how your 3 main points support your answer. So really giving an indication of the way that your points add up and that they as a whole answer the question. So the ways that they work together to prove that thesis that you initially had in your introduction. You also want to explain what your texts say generally about your theme. So just as a concluding factor, obviously bring it back to belonging like you always are going to be doing. You also want to show what your argument is and prove your philosophical point. So end on a sort of deep or meaningful statement, which really shows the marker that you have a good sense of emotional maturity and really a good knowledge of not only the text, but their wider connotations and meanings. You also want to be ending on a message, for example, the importance of belonging to society. You also want to include your personal response in the conclusion, so really not using words like I, for example, but still showing the way in which you as a reader responded. So you can do this through the way you phrase your language and the way in which you present your argument. So that's very important in your conclusion. So now let's just examine at the end of this video some aspects of essay style. Now obviously structure is important, but you also need to focus on the style of your essay, how it's written, in order to create a sophisticated essay which is going to influence and really make the marker want to read your essay. So first or third person is a common question. Obviously, first person is when you say things like I and me, and third person is things like they or the author or, the novel, for example. So third person is that requirement of formal style. So you really want to be using third person. It's a more formal language, it's more sophisticated, and it's really what is traditionally used in the essay. For example, you'll be stating things like one can see that rather than you can see that. So it's just that little difference that has a lot of meaning. First person or third person, however, can be used if you're looking at a personal response question. So by that, what I mean is the question has specifically asked for your personal response, and that's going to be directing you towards things like I or me. So that's the only case where you'd bring out those sort of terms. Secondly, grammar. Obviously, I don't need to explain why grammar is important. We all know how important it is to use correct grammar to create sophisticated writing which makes sense, which is logical, which is easy to read. There are so many benefits of having good grammar, and obviously having good grammar is going to impress the marker. So it's important to be accurate. You also have to think about past or present tense and then maintain this throughout. So if you're going to use past tense, stick with that. If you're going to use present tense, use that. But make sure you just use one and you're not flailing between the two. Present tense is preferable because it just shows a more sophisticated awareness of the fact that texts are ongoing rather than just in the past. You can also use grammar as a way of showing that sophistication to the marker. And this is obviously really linked to the third aspect, which is sentences. Now that's really an element of the grammatical construction of your work, and the sentences which you write are really reflective of your style and of your structure as a whole. So you want to be using varied sentence length. Mix it up, not just using one type of sentence over and over again. You should shorten your sentences to increase the accuracy of expression. So if you're having trouble getting a point across, a really good way to do it and really get that point across is to strip your sentences back and just make them a little bit shorter. For example, you can use dashes, colons, and semicolons just to improve the structure of your sentences. And also if you want a particularly long sentence, these punctuation marks are vital in ensuring you just don't have lines and lines of unpunctuated writing. However, it's a really good idea not to use things like ellipsis, which are ... and parentheses, which are brackets. These aren't punctuation traditionally used in essays. They're just informal and not traditionally advised. The fourth and final issue of essay style is whether it should be an integrated or a block essay. So block essays are where you do one text per paragraph. And this is basically a way of ensuring that you separate your texts and you make sure that you get your ideas across in each text rather than combining them all together. So that's a good way to go, especially in your early stages. Integrated essays include multiple texts in one paragraph. So that's where you're basically trying to include all three of your texts at once, analyze them all at the same time. So obviously that can get a bit tricky. And at the end of the day, this really isn't recommended as it's going to be leading to waffling, poor structure, untraceable argument, and lack of detail. So in the early days, you want to be going for block essay, separating your text, rather than trying to combine them all together. So that brings us to the end of our lesson today. This lesson has really examined the way in which you can write that perfect belonging essay. We've examined the way in which structure is really important and the way in which you can use things like additional reading, research, and essay style and combine this with the structure of your essay to produce a really logical essay which is going to be interesting for you to read. So if you follow these steps, you're well on your way to writing a successful and interesting belonging essay.